Hello, my name is Chetan Walia. Welcome to What Steve Jobs Told Nobody. It's an interesting title, isn't it? And it's an interesting question as well, the answer to which obviously is that if he told nobody, how do you know? And someone, in fact, ended up asking us this question when we'd posted this webinar up for registrations, that how do you know? And I reflected actually on that very insignificant remark made by someone. And the answer for us was, we know because we listen. And in the process of researching Steve Jobs, we have a whole archive of material available on the life and works of Steve Jobs and what it took to create Apple and different products and so on and so forth. But in looking at this from a fresh perspective in today's times, what we stumbled upon was a realization bigger than Steve Jobs. We stumbled upon a psychological revelation. And we are leaning this webinar today, of course, into the life and works of Steve Jobs and drawing certain lessons from it. But I think we'll be posing a bigger question for anyone who's listening in today. And we'll be questioning the real mechanics of the way our brain works, of the way we've come to understand management science, and the way we've really come to understand life as such. And we're using Steve Jobs as merely a lens into examining something bigger. Now, Steve Jobs has been an enigma, at least for the last 2 decades, or even greater for some who've been Apple fans. He's created an absolute wonderful, great company, so to say, on the face of this planet, revolutionized technology in a way, brought design into our life in the ways that we didn't know existed. He's done lots of great things. He's also had a dark side to his personality, which is well known by now. But one can't deny the fact that he's been a great creator. We're not calling him an inventor yet, because we'll get to that portion of the slide where we make the point that he's not been an inventor, but we are certainly acknowledging that he's a great creator. And let's begin with one of the cornerstones of beliefs that has defined all of his creations, and that has really defined what Apple has come to be known about. And what better way to start than to take a look back at 1997 commercial that aired all over the world, which is an Apple advertisement.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Fascinating, isn't it? The celebrated leadership qualities, so to say, are ones that are appearing on your screen right now, and that advertisement or the Apple ethos kind of challenges everything, and none more than Steve Jobs himself. So based on management literature that exists, that you've studied extensively, the books that you've read, the authors that you've read, the ones that you've cherished, the most common or the most popular values plastered across companies globally around the world, no matter where you go, based on a scientific study, are these. These are the qualities that companies value the most: respect, teamwork, integrity, developing people, humility, and flexibility. And a lot of leadership literature, especially in management and even so in sports, are built around these ethos. If you're not a respectable person, or you don't know how to respect each other, if you don't know how to rile a team with you, if you don't have a basic integrity in place, if you don't know how to develop people, and you're not flexible enough, and on top of it, you're not humble enough, then you must not really be a leader. So these are the leadership qualities. And on the other end of it, the Jobs key to success, as summarized by Walter Isaacson in his biography of Jobs. He studied Jobs, interviewed him. Of course, it's an authorized biography. And in a Harvard article, he summarized the Jobs leadership philosophy as these points. He spoke about focus. He spoke about Jobs' ability to simplify things, on taking responsibility, on leapfrogging from behind, on putting products before profits, on reality, on bending reality, on his drive for perfection, on his drive for selecting and choosing a selective kind of players to persevere with, engaging directly with the consumers face to face, and all these things that you see were really Jobs' key to success. And missing from that list were these things. Jobs didn't speak about respect or teamwork or integrity. Instead, he had his own leadership philosophy. Respect to him meant respect your experience. In his interview with one of the biographers that we'll see later, he only spoke about respect in terms of respect your own experience, learn from yourself, you don't have to respect people. Developing people was don't fear pissing off people. That was his stated philosophy in Apple, and I think it has merit in a way to look at it from the point of view that he spoke about. A lot of times we hold back from the fear of thinking what the other person will see, feel, or get hurt or something, but not Steve Jobs. Integrity was replaced by a very open admission on stealing from the giants. Teamwork was replaced by being a hypocrite, and he didn't deny that. Flexibility was replaced with running away. If I don't like something, be it a company, be it a studio, be it my shareholders, be anything, be it the board, I will simply run away. And humility, Steve Jobs was never known for, of course. He was always known and propagated that do anything that you have to do, be arrogant, be egoistic, but feel special at the end of the day. Don't worry about coming across. And that's quite related to not fearing pissing off people as well. So the leadership philosophy essentially was an opposite of what we've come to understand as leadership. But there must be some truth to what others say. So Peter Drucker, often recognized as the father of management and bringing to the fore the popular management beliefs that exist today by the way of textbooks and books and whatnot, he said the two most important functions of a business and are innovation and marketing. Now, if Peter Drucker is saying it, one doesn't argue with it. It must be the truth. But you're right, Steve Jobs, you get something different. He's known to be making statements which said that marketing is when you don't have a value to provide, and innovation is simply imitating other people's things. So what's the big deal about innovation and marketing? And here's proof of it. This is the former vice president marketing of Apple Computers speaking about the two words that Steve Jobs hated the most. Take a look.
Anytime we said the word brand, that was a dirty word. And the second dirty word was marketing. And marketing is when you have to sell to somebody. So if you're not providing value, if you're not educating them about the product, if you're not helping them get the most out of the product, you're selling. And you shouldn't be in that mode.
And there we are. So he had an opposite view of what marketing and innovation was than the entire management science believes. He has an opposite view of what leadership is than the entire management science believes. And he has an opposite view of what probably life qualities are than the entire human race believes. So what is it about this man? There is a celebrated edition of Harvard Business Review which talks about mental toughness and saying how it's an invaluable skill for surviving in today's world and for surviving in management science. Now, no one can argue against the statement that mental toughness should be valued, but Steve Jobs, there is a gentleman named Jeff Goodall who interviewed Steve Jobs right from 1980 to 2011. He knows him well, and he published an article which described Jobs amongst various good things that he wrote about him. But on the critical side of evaluation, he described Jobs as someone who is insecure as a person. Jobs was adopted into a family. He didn't live with his biological parents and was brought up with this whole insecurity, which led to him in being one of a rebel kind of students, dropouts from college, acid-dropping hippie kid. Jobs was always, he says, highly selfish, which was kind of a defense protectionist mechanism in his case. He cried at the drop of a hat. He was creative, emotional kind of a personality. If he didn't like something, things didn't go his way. He didn't refrain from showing his emotions, including crying in board meetings and in front of Apple staff who reports into him. Jobs was known as narrow-minded. If he decided on something that this is the way, contrary to him deciding in a very rebellious fashion where he's inventing and innovating things, he was very narrow-minded once the decision was taken. He also goes on to describe Jobs as a brat who could drop all his beliefs in an instant. Having convinced you that this is the way, he could change it in an instant. So there was no predictability or certainty that you associate with Steve Jobs, so to say. So mental toughness, well, far away from it. But one thing that the world largely agrees on, that Steve Jobs was at least a designer. Now you look at the literature or you look at the content that exists on design thinking, and today it's really popular in organizations. I don't understand why, because that content is actually meant for designers and a management professional cannot be one. and maybe another debate for another time. Well, let's not get sucked into that. But design thinking process says that one needs to go through a process of empathizing with the external environment, then defining a problem, then ideating on the problem, then figuring out prototype, and lays a lot of emphasis on testing a solution before it goes into the market. So, of course, design thinking professionals report great success stories and stuff, not getting into them for now. But if this is the process Steve Jobs followed to create designs, well, I have another story for you here. The design paradox of Steve Jobs was that he never empathized. In fact, when he spoke about Henry Ford, he said if Henry Ford was empathetic about the problem, he would have probably built better houses and not cars. Steve Jobs never believed in empathizing with the voice of the customer. According to Steve Jobs, customers don't know what they want when you talk about innovation, because how can they? He didn't worry about defining problems. He didn't define problems. He defined his ideas. As far as ideation was concerned, Steve Jobs was living a dream. He didn't ideate to create. He ideated to create something. He never ideated to solve a problem. He ideated to make things better. Prototype ideation, again, I will go back to the same point, was to create and not to solve. So prototypes were based on whether it looks good, whether Steve Jobs once made a statement that the design should be so good that the consumer feels like licking it and forget the usability of it. And testing, he was too narcissistic to allow testing of something that he created and he generated, whether that was at Apple, whether that was at Pixar, whether that was at Next Computers, and whether that was later in Apple Part 2 as well. So there's a design paradox of Steve Jobs in the sense that what the world has come to understand and be educated as design thinking, the Jobs process, even there, was a kind of a rebellion where he didn't believe in any of that process. And that drives us to a larger point as to the paradox of not being Steve Jobs, which is you. What do you, I mean, there are opposing views clearly in the way world perceives success to be and in the way Steve Jobs does. And what does that really tell us about us? Now look at there are 5 things that I want to point out your direction to. One is belief. There is a belief that this is the way management is supposed to be done. All management gurus or great celebrated authors write about it. And then, of course, there's an opposite view. We come to leadership. There's an acceptable way of doing things, which no one really can argue with. And then there is the Steve Jobs way of doing things, which is, I'll do it anyhow. Feel free to dislike me, leave my company, get lost, screw you. That's the way I will do business. Then there is logic. There is research academic in what Peter Drucker is trying to tell the world. But Steve Jobs will say, well, this is what I say, screw Peter Drucker as well. And then there's transparency, right? Companies are celebrated values of transparency. Let's be transparent. Let's build a management culture of transparency. Well, not Steve Jobs. He said, we'll be a secretive company. So the whole ethos of Apple is based on secrecy. The teams won't know what the other teams are working on till they have to collaborate with them. And that's the way Apple is structured. So transparency is a value that can be well thrown out because the success of Apple actually lies in secrecy. And then we talk about longevity, that we've created something, we've created a product, now let's exploit it in the marketplace. But the Steve Jobs method says, I will disrupt it. So the whole philosophy with Apple, under Steve Jobs at least, I don't know whether it still exists, was that if we have created something, it could be a product, we'll be the ones to disrupt it before the market can even catch up on. Now, the reason behind creating this sort of a narrative and giving a kind of an opposing view to the traditional versus the rebel of Steve Jobs is this. What does it tell you about you? In the sense, there is a great deal of knowledge that exists in the way we've been educated, conditioned, brought up, told by the leaders that we followed, in the way that we've learned business. There's a great deal of science that exists that this is the way to do it, and you do it this way, it leads to success. Now, there is a great deal of merit in someone like Steve Jobs who comes across and says this is also a way to do it, and it not just leads to success, it leads to a bigger success. Which side are you on? What is your management belief? And I want to pose a larger question. What has led to making of that management belief, and how do you know that it's the right thing to do and not Steve Jobs' method being a better thing to do? How would you really be able to ever decipher that? And that brings us to a deeper question. What do you see? And I'll even expand that question a little bit to saying, have you ever really seen anything? Because we see with a certain bit of screening in our heads. And the screen is education. The screen is the way we've come to understand the world. That screen is our knowledge. That screen could be the belief. And then we create an opposite, much like what Steve Jobs did, was to create a rebellion sort of mechanism where we see the opposite. They're both the part of the same screen. It's like saying, I don't believe in God. By the very statement, you've acknowledged that you believe it, and that's why you must rebel against it, because if you didn't have that screen or that belief in the first place, there's no need to state an opposite. You would just act. Have we ever really seen without a screen of prejudice, or without a screen of belief system, or without a screen of image, so to say? For example, let's take a very mundane, everyday example. You're sitting across a certain person. That person could be your wife, your husband, your brother, your sister. Have you really seen without the screen of that relationship? Have you really seen India without the screen of a relationship with the country? Have you seen politics without the screen of Modi? Do we watch television without a screen of a certain leaning towards a certain theory? Do we really see anything without a screen, or is that screen itself colored by a certain memory of the past? And that memory includes our knowledge, it includes our education, it includes our belief, what I've been read, what my experience was. When I went against it, there might be a hurt involved in it, there might be certain insecurities, and all these screens are colored by certain memory which color our seeing itself. And if I am seeing with the help of certain screens that I believe in, that I believe this is what leadership is, and now I see someone behaving in an opposite manner, now that person either is a good leader or a bad leader, but is it me seeing it? Or is it my screen seeing it? And if it's my screen seeing it, then am I really seeing anything, or am I simply repeating what that screen was fed into me? And it's very important to understand that, and please go through this, that whatever it is that exists in our mind as knowledge, whatever it is that exists in our mind as beliefs, whatever it is that exists in our mind as the right or the wrong thing to do, how did it enter your mind? It entered your mind because someone else, some authority figure somewhere, whether it's a book, whether it's a father, whether it's a mother, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a professor, whether it's a Modi, whether it's a prime minister, whether it's a president, that entered your mind through an external source. So is it even yours in the first place? Even if you're believing in the opposite, the non-opposite was stated by someone else and you're choosing to reject it. So where are you in the whole picture? What is your seeing? And if you're not seeing, then that seeing with the help of a screening, whether it's in running a company, whether it's in leading a life, whether it's in choosing an action, all it creates is a problem to solve. So I see coronavirus today and I've been fed all these things from all over the place, and now I've formed a certain screen in which to view the world. So some people will be pro-economy, some people will be pro-lives, and some people will be pro-livelihood because that's the screen they've chosen. What does that screen do for them? Now what does this seeing do for them? This seeing presents a problem to be solved and it creates a lot of action. Now, because that action is created by seeing that is not even yours, it was facilitated or motivated by an external source, it will always be full of conflicts and regret because the action isn't complete. I see one part of the story, I act on it, and now I haven't seen the whole story because I believed in a screen of that story, and so my action's never going to be complete, and it's going to end up in a half-baked, half-cooked story as what is happening to the world today with no completeness of action, and it'll be full of conflicts or regret. And the question that I really want to pose to you, please reflect this in your lives, in your relationships, within yourself, with your teachers, with your elders, with your families. Have you ever really seen anything without a screen? You might be having a conversation with your spouse today. Do you see what is happening there? Or do you see with the screen of what you want to avoid or what you want to do or what is your image? Or it's constantly interfering in the present moment. And what do you really see? Now, if we talk about the example that we were talking earlier part of this presentation, there's a management belief system that exists in the world. There's a contrarian view that exists in the world. Your management system in your company is somewhat successful. The management system of Steve Jobs is obviously successful. It's created the largest, most respectable company on the planet. What do you see? It's very easy to keep believing, oh, it's not for us. Steve Jobs is an exceptional case, so I'll keep believing in my status quo. It's equally easy for someone to say, well, that guy must be right. It's created the first $1 trillion company in the world, so that must be right. But what is your seeing guided by? Is it guided by you? Or is it guided by one theory or another theory? And if it's guided by some of the other theory, which I'm referring to as this word called screen, then where are you in the process? Where is your mind in the process? Where is your intelligence in the process? It's a matter of believing in one thing versus another thing. And the larger question that I really want you to ponder in your life today: have you ever really seen anything at all? And you see, seeing, listening, and learning, as we'll see shortly, is one movement. We've understood it differently because of the nature of how we've been taught and educated, but I want you to examine it today as these interconnected words that are appearing before you today, which is seeing, listening, and learning, and we'll see in a moment how they're all interconnected, and it has a much deeper meaning. So we're saying that, have you ever really seen anything? And the next question is, how do we listen to anything? Are we listening to the nature? Do you listen to the silence? Do you listen to the birds which are there? Do you listen to anything? Or do we listen with a certain image in mind? And that image is brought about by our knowledge. And I'm summing up this word knowledge as all entire summation of our beliefs and upbringing and whatnot into it. Based on it, we have an image about everything today. You have an image about a wife, you have an image about a son, you have an image about a daughter, you have an image about a politician. And no matter what comes to your mind through your ears or eyes, we are listening with a certain bit of image. Do we ever hear anything without the interference of the image that already exists? Because if we don't hear anything without the interference of that image, then is it really listening? Because are we listening to what is actually happening? Are we listening to what I am actually saying? Or are we listening with certain lenses which already exist in our mind? And if the lenses already exist in our mind, then you're already listening with a certain conclusion. You see, there is someone who comes on television, let's say, and is giving a national address or is speaking to you. You already have a certain image in mind of that person. You've already concluded the righteousness of that person or not, and you're listening with that conclusion in mind. Or you're listening with an opposition to that conclusion, and it's the same thing, because what is interfering in examining what is happening is that image, similar to what we were talking about screen in seeing, is image in listening, and that conclusion, what it does is again presents a problem. So I conclude that this is what is going to happen to the world. I listen to things and I absorb messages, and I will discuss with my teammates, I will discuss with my family, I will get an opinion with the conclusion that already exists in mind, and all that my mind day in and day out tries to do is to manipulate that opinion to fit into that image, to define a problem, and once the problem is defined in a very abstract way, it gives me action to do. And that action is full of burden of that image itself, because I haven't really paid attention to what was happening or what is the actuality of things. And that is what we're calling the burden of listening. Being a great listener is not about paying attention to the other person, is not about paying attention to what is happening around me, is not about showing respect, as we've understood through various lessons or various screens of listening that we've been educated in. The ability to listen comes from not having an image, because as long as I have an image, I'm not really listening. Just the way I've never really seen anything, what have I heard in my life? Listening is about seeing the truth in the falseness. You see, there is an image created in my mind, brought about by knowledge, which I have no way of validating whether even that is in itself true or not. I'm choosing to believe in it. I'm choosing to believe in it because it gives me security in my life. I'm choosing to believe in it because it gives me a livelihood, which again gives me security in my life. So I have these images which are essentially serving a self-existing purpose in my life, and I'm listening to the world through those images. I have beliefs that I want to guard because I have great boardroom or corridor conversations around it. It's a great time pass. It gives me a sense of relevance, and I'm listening with all those images in my mind. But what I'm missing out on in this process of how we go through the listening and seeing, what I'm missing out on is actually seeing what the reality is. So 3 months earlier, we are given a narrative which we are listening with a certain image of fear in our mind that coronavirus is going to kill us all and we're happily locked down. Today you see advertisements on television that wear a mask and go on, nothing's going to happen. Has the virus bloody changed its course or what? There are more deaths happening today, but what are we listening and seeing with? And is there any individualistic intelligence left in our brains today to see or listen independently, can I see or can I understand or can I hear the truth in the falseness of my own images? The image in your head is a creation which was probably transported in your mind when you were 5, 7, 10, 15 years old. Can you see the falseness in the very truth of that image? And that is what true listening is about. The act of listening is attention. And I want to expand on this word called attention. How do we understand attention? When we're in school, and as must have been the experience of almost everybody listening in today, you're in school and your mind wanders. The teacher says, "Hey, Mr. So-and-so, please pay attention." What does that word attention mean there? That attention word means please block everything out and focus on your 2+2 homework. That is what we understand as attention. Paying attention actually in our mind has been confused with that block out everything, focus on what I am telling you to do, and that is paying attention. Is that the meaning of the word attention, or is that the meaning of the word focus? And we have confused the two words completely. What is attention? Attention means to attend. Now, what do you attend to? It's to whatever is happening. Who says you can attend to only one thing at a time? There is Chetan speaking, there are things happening at your home, there's a phone ringing, there are noises in the background, there's a phone churning, there's a bird outside. Attention is paying attention to the whole, and that is listening. And that listening comes from freedom, and that freedom is in paying attention, not in focusing, because the focusing is guided by that image in your brain which says pay attention to this only, because this only is the narrowing down of intelligence that has occurred through years of conditioning, which has blocked out listening, which has blocked out seeing, and which, as we'll see shortly, is the reason why there's no learning as well. So let's come to learning. What do we understand by learning? You see, learning is accumulation of knowledge. There has been an upbringing, there has been a formal education system, there's been knowledge, there's been belief, there's been book. All of it leads to certain accumulation of knowledge, which we make sense as we go through our life, in our experiences, in our leading life, in our dealing with other people. But that accumulation of knowledge and how it plays out in reality is what we normally refer to as learning. And in that accumulation of knowledge, or in those mechanisms of acquiring knowledge, there might be formal or informal mechanisms. There are formal mechanisms like schools and colleges and universities and books and reading and listening and whatever it is. And there are informal mechanisms which are generally governed by these mechanisms of what are the right and wrong things to do in societies. Wisdom passed on by elders, religious teachings passed on, the power of prayer, and so on and so forth, are these informal mechanisms of learning. And then we have certain experiences which feeds into that process of learning. Now, there are a lot of theories that go around that experience is the best teacher and we learn from experience. And I want to momentarily at least question that do we learn anything from experience, or does experience essentially simply feed into the process of what we've come to know as accumulation of knowledge itself? I have learned a certain way about doing certain things. For example, my screens are formed, my images are formed, and then I have certain experiences. Is that experience teaching me anything new? I've been told, I don't know whether it's true or not, but I'm pretty sure it's matching the exact figures, that up to 2020, the year that we are living in, the world has seen about 7,000 wars. As we stand in 2020, we have a border conflict happening right now between India and China. We have a border conflict happening between India and Pakistan. The world is, of course, full of these conflicts and stuff. So have we learned anything from experience? Or are we, after 5,000 years of documented history of the world, still learning how to deal with a war? We've had 5,000 years of documented history, and the psychological questions that a human being still grapples with in 2020 are issues of security and food, and not having food, and not having water, and not having basic amenities and stuff. Have we really learned anything from experience? Is experience really a teacher? Or is experience simply a feeder to the knowledge that's already been accumulated? And I say it's a feeder because we gauge our experiences, or the meaning of our experiences, based on whether you will get a reward or whether you will be punished for believing in a certain manner. There can be a theory of Peter Drucker. There can be a theory of Steve Jobs. I choose it based on where I see a reward and where I see risks of getting punished. There might be a political leader giving a televised address, you will choose it based on the screens that you have, based on the images that you have, and more importantly, within the ecosystem that you are living in, whether there is a cost to pay or whether there is a reward to get, and that's how our beliefs are formed. So is experience really a teacher? I really don't know, because if you don't have a screen and if you don't have an image, then it is sufficient to say that you might have a new experience. But when I'm seeing with a screen, when I'm listening with an image, when I'm learning with the knowledge of the past, I don't think the human mind, at least psychologically, is capable of experiencing or opening up to anything new. And if that is the case, then is there any learning at all? If I accept the knowledge that someone else has given me, if I accept the belief that someone else put in my mind as a part of my growing up years, if I accept the conditioning that my politics or my country is giving me, if I accept the beliefs that my entire ecosystem is spreading around me, is there any learning at all? Or is there simply a walking, talking, conditioned, past, dead brain walking around passing on the same knowledge and beliefs which have essentially existed and not changed for the last 5,000 years? Is there any learning at all? Or is it just a repetition of the past? At least insofar as psychologically is concerned, either I will conform to it or I will rebel to it, but it still exists within the same space. And isn't it totally and completely conditioned by knowledge and beliefs which are not even your own? Because no matter what the knowledge is, it's been transported into your mind by someone external to you. The knowledge could be new to you. Make no mistake about it. You pick up a book on heart surgery, it will seem like a revelation to you because you're not a doctor. But that knowledge isn't new per se. It was written in 1953 by Christian Bernard. But the knowledge isn't new. But to us it can come as new. But that doesn't matter. No matter what we learn, no matter what we believe, no matter what we accumulate, has already existed somewhere. So is there any newness at all to what your learning and discovery is? And as long as the seeing and as long as the listening is colored by screens and images, is there any learning at all? Is there another kind of learning? And I'm not suggesting there is. I'm wanting you to explore that question within you. There is learning that happens through accumulation, as we just saw. And then there is learning that is a formal education system. Now, a formal education system, whether it's a school or a college or a university or a post-graduation or even post that, gives us certain routines. Those routines makes it possible for people to get jobs and earn livelihoods and stuff. It's essentially a mechanical kind of a routine which gives you a sense of security. Now, it gives you a sense of security. It becomes a mechanical, predictable process. Of course, it's needed because human beings need to be secure. But is there another form of learning is essentially the question. Because when we are getting guided in this process of knowledge accumulation or in this process of belief accumulation, is there another kind of learning? Or is that it? That when I have to learn, I will have to either go to some person or to some book or to go within myself, which is another popular kind of learning that's emerged these days, which they, I think, term as a mindfulness. But what is myself again? If I'm choosing to learn about myself, what is the process involved? You will sit in a corner, be quiet, go into yourself. I don't know how you do it, because how does one get into their own self? But anyways, leave the mechanics of it aside. What will you learn about yourself? You will learn only about your past. You will learn about the way you behaved. You will discover a pattern of your behavior that either annoys or upset other people if you care about them. You will learn a pattern about your behavior that probably was self-destructive. You don't need Einstein to tell you that you are. You will learn a pattern about yourself as to how you behave in relationships or how your subordinates treat you or how you treat them, and so on and so forth. You will accumulate knowledge of the past, and it already exists. Now, whether you want to call it learning about yourself or whether you want to call, you had a great experience of enlightenment or whatever bullshit phrase you want to give it, whatever that learning is still accumulation of the past. And so is there another kind of learning? And if there isn't another kind of learning, the question that I really want you to ponder upon, is there any newness at all? Or is it a repetition? Or is it just a repetition of the past? You see, we see with certain screens which color are very seeing or interacting with each other. Then we interact with our nature, with our ecosystem, with the planet, with our country, with the media, with our organization, with our employees, and we are subjected to listening. And we are listening with certain images of what your goals are or what my goals are, what I want to achieve, where I want to direct it. So I already have a conclusion in my mind, and that listening is with an intent to facilitate a certain outcome. So is there any listening of the newness at all? And then we use whatever we have learned, whatever knowledge I have, whatever beliefs I have, whatever other people wrote, I use all that to facilitate my own screens, to facilitate my own images, to lead a life that is predictable. And all I'm questioning right now, using these opposite examples of Steve Jobs, is one very simple question. Is there any newness at all to your brain and your intelligence and your mind? And it's a troubling question. And the answer to that question comes about not from any knowledge source. The answer to that question doesn't come across or doesn't come about into you from any other person or from any other authority. It doesn't come from spirituality, and it doesn't come from science, nothing. The answer lies within you. And if you're able to observe the reality of it, if you've been internalizing to what we've been talking about so far, you would have reached a point where there's no merit in resisting, that must, but that, and but this, and but that, and but there's no merit in resisting. And if you've reached that point where you're not resisting and you're kind of accepting that yes, there is nothing new, because whatever I've learned or read or inquired about has been written in some book or some opinion of the other person, then you reach a state in mind where you acknowledge or accept that yes, there is no learning at all. There is nothing else to learning at all. And if you accept that, then there is a kind of a silence. And I will define that silence in a moment. I don't mean it silence in the sense of noiselessness. I mean silence differently. But we'll get to defining that silence. For the time being, there is this funnel kind of action that takes place that we've been talking about, that we see with a certain memory in action. We have memory, we have images, we have the whole burden of the past. And that memory essentially defines the screens by which we see the world. That screen defines the problems that we encounter or don't encounter in the world. And that problem essentially gives us action in our life. Now, if you see a very funnel approach from a very big reality, we bring it down to a manageable proportion, and the action needs to be this small in compared to what I actually began seeing at the point where memory interfered. We are saying something opposite. We are saying that can there be a mechanism where I accept, as we spoke about earlier, to see the truth and the falseness of all of it and not allow the past to interfere? Of course, you can't really literally wipe out and become memoryless, but can I not allow it to interfere in the present moment? If I don't, then I see. Then I see what really is. And I don't need to use my stored intellect to make sense of things, because if I see what is, then I will act accordingly. For example, if there's a fire right now in your room, you won't dive into your memory to tell you that fire can burn. It's already there and you will see it and you will act. Can I stop my past to interfere? Can I see? Which means an act of total attention. Not focus, not selective, not do only this much, attend to everything. There are opinions which say that economy is going to decline. There are opinions that says that health is going to decline. There are opinions about pay total attention to the said, to the unsaid, to the noise, to the silence. And when you see like that, then the action is the opposite end of the funnel, that it's likely to be more complete. What we mean so by observing out of silence is essentially observing without the interference of the past. Your seeing is with your screens, listening with the images, or learning with an accumulated knowledge is all interference of the past. Not that that is not needed. It is needed, but can I allow my understanding to be in a manner that the past doesn't interfere with the understanding? And then I use my knowledge and my learning to deal with the action that comes about rather than selecting the action itself. Because if I'm unable to understand the magnitude of this, that there is no intelligence without me disallowing the past to interfere in the present. There is absolutely no intelligence because the past is dead. No matter how much merit in that knowledge exists, it's dead. If you're learning about yourself from 20 years back and having some sort of that has no relevance because that past is dead. Whatever action happened then and didn't happen has no relevance to you today. The past is dead. If I'm living out of the past, then I'm essentially living a dead life already. Can I see without the interference of the past? Can I see without my thoughts being active? Can I see without my knowledge being active? Can I see without my screen being active? Can I listen without my image being active? Which is to just pay total attention and observing without the intent to conclude or to judge. And when I do that, there is a different kind of intelligence in place. And so we come back to Steve Jobs only because we have to. We titled the webinar like that. I can't end without Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs has a life of rebellion, as we've already seen. But I want to, having come to this stage, we're talking about seeing a certain level of holisticity through questioning the very principles of the way that we've been educated, brought up, listen, learn, seeing, and all of that. Once we're able to question the boundaries of the way that we see the world, we come to an understanding that there is a lot more to life. There's a lot more to intelligence, and there's a lot more to perception itself. And this whole prelude was necessary to be able to come to this particular slide. Now, we're not suggesting that Steve Jobs lived the life of a complete soul or some enlightened being or something, but at least with respect to creation, he was able to do certain things, and we're just drawing from that one person's experience to draw certain principles of creation, the first of which required us to take you through this journey, which is an understanding of the wholeness. Because if I approach creation or creating anything new, bringing something new into existence is what creation is. And to be able to bring something new into existence, I need to be able to let go of the old. So my mechanisms of seeing, my mechanisms of hearing, my mechanisms of listening, my mechanisms of learning were so old and outdated into other people's creation that we needed to get you to see through it to be able to get you a complete understanding of what wholeness is. And unless there is wholeness, there is no creation. In terms of Steve Jobs, the world of 80s where everybody was busy into hardware, Steve Jobs was involved in creating software for Apple. In the 90s and early 2000s, when the world moved to software, Steve Jobs was busy creating hardware. And the point I'm making is not that it was some sort of a rebellion thing. The guy was almost every time, at least in a narrow area of technology, trying to see a whole picture as to what is the missing link. When the world is creating substandard animated movies, Steve Jobs was busy challenging the whole creations of Walt Disney through Pixar by creating Toy Story. And I think that's the wholeness of the man, that one needs to be able to see a whole picture, block the mechanisms of learning which is getting guided or which is guiding the whole world by, and only then there is a value to add. And the next thing that happens in the journey of creation, that one can't define a fixed optimum. If I define an end result, if I define that this is a fixed optimum that I will create within, that definition is being guided by learning of the past. I don't know whether you get that. For example, let's say you decide that I can only do this much in life. Where is that definition coming from? That is coming from some sort of an experience. That is coming from some sort of knowledge. That is coming essentially from some sort of learning. That learning is dead because it occurred in the past. So the principle of creation, to be able to create anything new, you don't need to know where it ends. You only need to know where it begins. For example, this particular webinar, we didn't see through the whole thing before we announced what Steve Jobs told nobody. We didn't even know. We just thought of an idea or a title that will essentially sell, and the rest flew. So having no fixed optimum is this. Whether it was Apple, he didn't have a fixed optimum. Whether it was Pixar, he didn't have a fixed optimum. Whether it was Next, the company that he formed post exiting Pixar, he had no fixed optimum. And one thing led to the other. What he used in Apple was applied in Pixar, was applied in Next, and whatever he created next, in Next, which was eventually sold to Apple and led to return of Apple 2 or Steve Jobs 2 into Apple, the whole operating system, OS, as you know, is not created by Apple, was created by Steve Jobs at Next. He could never use it. He could never make money of it. He didn't know how to make a rupee on it, but Apple made billions with it once Steve Jobs returned, because the man had no fixed optimum. The third point is to acknowledge disequilibrium. And the whole webinar has been spent in just this, is to getting you to acknowledge a disequilibrium. That there is a disequilibrium in the way I see, there's a disequilibrium in the way I hear, there's a disequilibrium in the way I listen, there's a disequilibrium in the way I learn. And if that's not acknowledged, there is no change, which means you keep rooted in the past, you'll keep the same behavior as the past. So there's no question of creating anything new. You can only believe that you've done something new without actually having ever done it. And that kind of sums up the lives of 7 billion people on the planet. What Steve Jobs did was build something, created something, lost attachment with it completely, disrupted it in his own self, and created something else, because he was able to acknowledge the disequilibrium in his own creations as well. And then the next principle is to pay total attention. We've been talking about it, I think, for the past 45 minutes. You have to question the way you see, the learn, the action has to come out of paying total attention and not a selective focus. For example, how do I make more money is a selective focus. What's the disequilibrium that I see, and what's the way out of it? I don't know what the end point will be. Because of total attention, you will get to a start point, and that is enough for creation. And then the next one is to shift the game. How Steve Jobs did it was moved the debate of technology. When people are talking about technology and code and software and hardware and nanotechnology and microtechnology, Steve Jobs talks about human connection, because he acknowledged the disequilibrium that people had with technology, shifted the game to human connection. Then it comes the process of creation. That because you're trying something new and there's no history to it, you need to have a mindset or a behavior in you which kind of very quickly can honor the errors. So creative people mostly have no shame in admitting their failures. We'll try thousands of things and we'll acknowledge 1001 failures, but there's no really shame in doing it. And I think within the field that Steve Jobs operated, we were telling earlier his stories of crying in front of his staff and people reporting to him, was essentially a process of honoring his own errors so that you get over it. Now keep going and move to the next step. Steve Jobs, and this is purely from his life, is a controller from the back. What do we mean by a controller from the back? When you're a creator, because it's your learning, it's your acknowledgements, it's your attention, you have no fixed optimum. So essentially it's an individualistic kind of a thing where you've seen something and you're trying to drive, you kind of become a controller from the back. And we say that he was a controller from the back because it is only from the back that you can push people and they will fall forward and create something. If you are leading them from the front and you push people, they will just fall back down and there's no moving forward. So you need to be a controller, but leadership within the field of creation is from leading from the back and not from the front. You can come to the front later, but leading essentially is from the back, where you're able to, through your vision, create a mechanism to push people to greatness. And I think what Steve Jobs constantly spoke about in a lot of his biographies and articles, that he pushed people, he was rude to them, he was mean to them, with the central idea that I will make them do much more than they ever believed that they can do. And that is push from the back. And lastly, and there's a lot more to this, but we have to conclude it somewhere. And lastly, this is about being a transformative collaborator. Collaboration doesn't mean get along with people, take them along, go hug each other and live together and live happily ever after. Transformative collaboration is about creating a selective amount of people who believe in what you're trying to create, and that's all that you need to work with. Those who don't believe in you can stay out of the picture because they're not going to contribute to the transformation. And the transformative collaboration is a pull factor. Who's getting attracted to that vision? Who's getting attracted to that creation? Who's getting attracted to Steve Jobs talking about changing the world of technology and changing the world in terms of how human beings come in contact with technology? The people who liked it, tolerated him, were drawn to him, got pulled by him, and they created magnificent things. So from a life of rebel, from a life of doing the opposite, we challenged you today to examine the way you see, the way you listen, the way you learn, the way you pay attention. And it all was a prelude to coming down to accepting or to learning these principles of creation. And we don't believe that you could have really appreciated these simple 8 principles or understood it without us giving you a bit of a prelude to challenge the very ethos of the way we learn, listen, and the way we see. So that was the webinar today, what Steve Jobs told nobody. Of course, he didn't tell us either, but we tried to see, we tried to learn, and we tried to listen to things that weren't said to anybody, that weren't told to anybody, that these essentially have not been revealed by Steve Jobs, but we examined into the processes of our mind as it exists psychologically. And I think it was important in our own heads when we sat down as a team to create this webinar. It was very important for us to draw lessons or to draw into a psychological learning and present to you something that creates enough food for thought in your mind to examine a pattern that has come into being and to really question the way we live our lives and to question the newness of intelligence. Let's have your questions. We're ready on the other side.